As a nutritionist, there is a question which I get asked a lot from strangers on the street to clients of my own, and it's a little bit of a curly one, and I want to answer it for you today. That question is: does one day off track or one meal that's unplanned really ruin my fat loss progress? And the answer to this is it actually depends, but I realize that that answer is about as useful as an umbrella in a hurricane. And so I want to break it down a little bit for you today and answer it in a way that you'll never need to ask this question again because you'll have a really solid understanding of the mechanisms behind the question, that you'll understand the process altogether. So to do this, we are going to look at a few numbers. And I'm going to share my screen and we're going to dive right into it now. So what this looks like, the numbers we're going to talk about here is your basal metabolic rate. Basal metabolic rate is the amount of energy your body requires to run its basic functions on a day-to-day basis. This is everything to keep your heart pumping. This is everything to keep your immune system working, your digestive system processing, your brain activated, and whatnot. And this basal metabolic rate is a number that is equated as calories. So calories are purely just energy from food, and it's just a unit of measurement, right? They're not good, they're not bad, they're purely just a unit of measurement for energy from food. And our basal metabolic rate is determined as a caloric amount. So this is going to be different for everyone. It's going to be based on your weight, your height, your gender, and your age. And, in very short terms, a larger body requires more fuel to run and a smaller body requires less. So depending on your size and your gender and all that, you're going to have a different basal metabolic rate. The next number you need to understand is total daily energy expenditure, TDEE. This is made up of your BMR and then your incidental activity or your kind of daily movement. This is getting up, doing the dishes, walking to work, those sorts of things. This is NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So it's just your incidental daily activity, and everyone's level of that is also different. Some people move a lot, some people move a lot less, and depending on how much you move, this can have quite a big impact on your total energy output or your caloric burn on a day-to-day basis. The next one is your intentional activity. This is your exercise. So are you strength training? Are you running a lot? These sorts of things. That has an impact on your total daily energy expenditure or your caloric burn. And then the next part of this, and we're going to break this down and look at a diagram in a minute so it all lands for you, is your food choice. So thermic effective food. If you eat a higher protein diet, you're going to burn more of that food as calories in the sense of needing it costs your body energy to process that food. Whereas if you eat a lot of your food from fat sources or carb sources, it's very easy for your body to utilize that. It doesn't cost your body as much. So these all determine your total caloric burn across the day. And the last number I want you to really get a good understanding on is your maintenance. Maintenance is the amount of energy you can take in. So we've got the word calories there. I know it's a little bit of a word that has terrible connotations, but remember, it's just a unit of measurement for food energy. So maintenance is the amount of calories you can consume in a day where you are neither gaining nor losing weight, but you feel great. So your energy's good, your sleep's good, your weight's stable, you're just maintaining everything. So these are the three numbers you need to understand. BMR is that really basic level of you need this much food to function on a daily basis. If you're eating consistently less than this, there's going to be detrimental effects to your health in the long term. Total daily energy expenditure is your BMR plus your activity and your food choices. And then maintenance is the amount that you need to eat on a day-to-day basis just to maintain your base level and feel great in the process, not under eating, but not changing, which is a whole different thing. So let's break this down into a little bit more of a graph for you so you can get this kind of locked into your brain before we dive into answering the question of, does one meal off track actually sabotage weight loss progress? So this is a bit of a graph of your TDEE, total daily energy expenditure. We've got your metabolic rate here, which is by far the biggest percentage of your daily output. An average size human has on average probably a metabolic rate of sort of in the maybe 13 to 1600 calories, just very, very broad ballpark there. But no, there's not very many humans that have a a BMR of lower than 1,000 calories or down at that even 1,200 calories. So any diet that's putting you into that sort of a deficit is probably taking you lower than your basal metabolic rate, and it's going to backfire on you at some point. And then we have these other components which are made up of all of the different things. If you're very sedentary, your percentage of non-exercise activity thermogenesis is going to be a lot smaller. And this is why step count matters. This is why getting up and going for those 10-minute walks matter. This is why just moving and whatnot matters. There's a component of your total daily energy expenditure which comes from your food choices. Higher protein has a higher thermic effect, higher fats, higher carb has a lower thermic effect, and then exercise, which has a surprisingly small impact. I think most people will be a little surprised by this. The exercise that you do at the gym doesn't burn anywhere near as many calories as you think it does. The largest percentage of your caloric burn comes from the engine that's running those activities, which is a key part of what I want you to take away from this. So what you can see from this is there's a huge amount of individual variability. And this is one thing I want you to take away from this. This is why no one diet size fits all, because what makes up that basal metabolic rate is determined by a whole lot of intricate things based on your body makeup, size, age, gender, etc. Your daily activity levels, very personal to you. Your food choices could change from day to day. Your exercise output also likely changes. So this can be a very variable number and very individual to you, and that's really, really important. So let's take this to a human, a very average human, and see if we can answer the question, does one meal off track or one day off track or some treat foods in the weekend really sabotage weight loss progress if that is your goal? So I want to introduce you to Mary. We're going to take her as an average female who's averagely active. She doesn't have a lot of weight to lose. She maybe wants to lose about 5 kilos. We've been working with her for a while. We've got a really nice foundation set up for Mary. She eats pretty well. She's consistently sort of moving and active across the day. And we've got a good idea of what her maintenance calories are. When we've got a good idea of maintenance calories and we know, if she eats sort of this amount, she stays pretty weight stable, we can then say, well, if we bring in a little bit of a deficit, we can get her to drop some weight. Now, we would do this with our clients in the program with much less numbers than this, but we can go to the layer of numbers if we need to, if we really need to get quite particular. But I want to use the numbers here because it really highlights and answers the question once and for all, how one meal can make a big difference. So for Mary, we know we've got those foundations set up. She's eating well, she's moving well. We know that her maintenance calories are around the 2,000 calories a day mark. Just as an average, really nice maintenance amount for Mary. She feels good on it, her weight is stable on it, but she has a little bit of a weight loss goal. She wants to drop about 5 kilos. So what we've done is we've put her into a little bit of an intentional deficit. This is in order to help her lose weight. She's still moving, she's still eating good protein, all these things, but her deficit amount of calories is 1,800 calories a day. Now, what I want you to understand here is that when it comes to maintenance calories, it doesn't have to be exactly the same every day. There can be some variation across the week or even across a longer time horizon, but I think a week is a good set point. There can be some variation in it's what's the average. At the end of the week, what did you typically average? Did it fall at your maintenance level? So with Mary, in this week 1 example, we set her calories at 1,800, which is a slight deficit on her maintenance of 2,000. Not too much of a deficit, note that. People go too hard and fast for weight loss and they sabotage their long-term results as a result of that. So a very small deficit for Mary, averaged out across the week. So Monday she ate about 1,850, 1,700, 1,800, 1,650. Friday she had a little bit maybe of a bigger dinner, 1,900. Saturday, again, just a little bit more in there, a little bit more room to wiggle in the weekends, 1,600, and then across the week, her average was 1,792. So she stayed at her deficit amount that we set, which was 1,800 calories or just under. And she did this over time and she just incrementally dropped some weight in a very gentle, controlled manner. She didn't go too far. She stayed progressing in the gym. Her sleep stayed good. She stayed, getting some good strength and stuff and gains. And so things were moving quite well. Then we have another week example here. Monday, much the same, Tuesday, much the same, Wednesday the same, Thursday the same. And this is a typical pattern for a lot of people. You go to work on those days, you have a lot of routine locked in. It's really easy to be consistent on these days. But Friday comes along and she has a glass of wine. So that adds a bit more of a calorie bump to her day. Maybe she had a slightly bigger meal and a glass of wine on the Friday night. Saturday came around, did her normal stuff through the day, and then she went out for dinner with friends and she had a couple of drinks and a meal that was outside of her control. She still made good choices in the sense that she chose some steak and some vegetables, but there were some fries with it, and she maybe had half of a dessert with her partner. But it bumped their total calories up to about 2,600. And this is very conservative, guys. I could have made these numbers a lot bigger, but I've put them at a very conservative level just to show you kind of how this plays out, even if you are still being quite careful. She was still being quite intentional at this point. She wasn't going to excess. She wasn't being like, oh, I'm out, I'm just going to drink all the drinks and, eat everything in sight. She was still being quite intentional here, but it does have an impact to those numbers. She didn't sleep so well that night. The next day she was quite hungry, so she did eat a little bit more on Sunday, which is pretty typical if you've had perhaps a higher caloric intake, some alcohol, or disrupted sleep. Your appetite can just be a bit up, but she didn't go over too much, and her average was 1992 across the week. Now, this is where we get to the crunch point. This is still just under her maintenance calories of 2,000 calories across the week. What this puts her back to, she had these couple of meals and whatnot out, and it's put her back to maintenance. So technically across this week, she didn't lose any body fat. So did these couple of meals, the meal on Saturday and the wine on Friday night, disrupt her progress? No, because it's a one-off, right? It's a one-off in the grand scheme of things. It actually doesn't matter. But she didn't lose weight this week either. So you could say if the goal was to lose some weight, then yes, those meals did disrupt her progress. Now, I don't think this is a bad thing. I think there's some variability here, but we do need to understand that if weight loss is the goal, these meals might be the ones that actually do hold you back in the long term. And I think the other point that we've got to remember here is that there's other variables that can be impacted. What if she moves less on these days, and so her caloric burn from that non-exercise activity thermogenesis is lower? Then she might actually be consuming more and moving less, and it might bump that number up a little bit more. The other part to this is when Monday morning rolls around and Mary jumps on the scales, her weight's actually jumped up by a kilo on scale weight. And so she's freaking out. She's like, what the heck have I done? I didn't go over my maintenance calories. I know I didn't get into a deficit for the week, but why am I a kilo heavier? And here's the thing is that, through these meals, she had more sugar, she had more carbs, she had some alcohol, she's had less sleep. So she's holding on to some fluid weight, which has bumped her scale weight up. And this is what really throws most people out is throughout the week, she felt like she was doing really well. She was following the process. She was sticking to the plan. She's like, I just had 2 meals off track and now I've put on a kilo. And actually she hasn't. Her weight has fluctuated naturally because she had some change to her inputs. She hasn't actually gained weight, but she also hasn't lost. So this brings me to the question, does a meal out sabotage your weight loss progress? It may or it may not, and it truly depends on the choices you make at that time and how it impacts those averages across a time point. If it's a one-off, if you're going well with your plan, you're staying in a little bit of a deficit, and you have a one-off meal out and it bumps you up to maintenance or just above for a week, and then you get straight back into it, for 3 to 4 weeks following that, it's not going to be a big deal. But if every weekend you're going and making these, just slight choices that are bumping you up out of your deficit, then absolutely those meals could be the things that stop you from losing weight in the long term. And I think this is where a lot of frustration comes in for people is they feel like they're dieting all the time throughout the week. I'm so good all week, and then I just had 1 meal on Saturday. But if over time that average is at your maintenance or just above, you're not going to see fat loss occurring. And this is why, with our clients, we look at a whole lot of the deeper layers and really look at a way to achieve long-term results when it comes to weight loss in a way where you're not having to constantly play with these numbers and feel like you're tracking everything and can't have a single meal out. And the way we do this is looking at a few key things. We look at making sure your meal structures are really protein forward. So this increases the thermic effect of your food, it increases satiety and reduces the cravings and the urges for foods that can be higher calorie and easily bump you over the edge when it comes to actually which food choices you make and whether you're staying in maintenance or whether you're going above. So protein is a really, really important part of any weight loss plan, and it needs to be factored in, and it can be used really effectively as a cool tool. The other part of it is we look at building the engine, and this really ties back to that basal metabolic rate piece. When you have more muscle mass on your frame, when you have a bigger engine, essentially, a higher metabolism, you're going to burn more at rest. A lot of people, when it comes to exercise, are focused on going for a run and burning calories. That is calories burned in that moment, and your hunger is going to come up to match that, and you're probably going to overshoot the mark. And I see this all the time with people that are like, I'm always running or always doing this stuff, but they can't drop weight. And it's because your hunger will generally increase to match the amount that you've burned, and you'll probably overeat anyway. Whereas if you get into some strength training and you actually build up that muscle mass, build up that metabolism, build a bigger engine, you can have a higher amount of caloric intake before you go over the mark. And this is something that I've done personally for myself, and I've seen it work really, really well time and again for clients, is just build up that base. So you've actually got some room to have some wiggle room there within your nutrition plan and not have to be so regimented and rigid with sticking to exactly the plan all the time. The other part that we do there is increasing incidental daily movement. This is looking at your step count and that non-exercise activity piece, because I think this is another piece of the puzzle which is missed, is that we focus on intentional exercise because that quote unquote burns calories, and we forget that just our movement across the day has an even bigger impact on that total caloric burn. So if you're focused on some fat loss and you're really trying to make sure you're staying in a little bit of a deficit so that you're dropping weight, and you have something come in, there's a social occasion where there's a little bit less control over the total amount of food you have, go into it with some intention and increase your movement at that time as well to match the increase in activity, and you might buffer that difference a little bit. So it's not about going to burn off the calories you've eaten, it's just you've got fuel there, so use it really, really well. Go for a walk, get some more movement in, and actually just feel good in the process. And the last part is just fueling really, really well to avoid cravings. If you're restricting all week, the likelihood of just mental fatigue or diet fatigue, it can be called as well, coming in the weekend where you just want to go and eat other foods. You're sick of dieting, you're sick of feeling like you can't have anything all the time, and you're like, what the heck, I'm going to do it. And then you're frustrated on a Monday. So rather shifting the focus to actually fueling really well, enjoying the food you're eating. If your food is boring, it is not your food's fault. You can eat really, really well and really, really interesting food and still stay in a caloric deficit if you need to, if fat loss is your goal. So fueling well, fueling consistently so that your energy stays up, so that your sleep is really good, so that you want to keep going and feeling good in the process. We do this with all of our clients. We help them build the skill set to do this over time. We can go as many layers deep into this as is required in order to get the result that you came for. It's not hard. It's just that a lot of people don't understand the pieces of puzzle that need to be put into place to make it work well and make it last in the long term. So if you want to change that, if you want to go into 2025 actually having the tools to do this properly and stop wrestling against that feeling of constantly having to go on another diet, I would love to help you with that. If you want to know a little bit more about how we could do that, comment blueprint below if you're watching this on Facebook. If you're watching this on YouTube, it'll be linked there for you, and it will give you a run through of the basics of what we do in our Body Reset program with our clients and get consistently stellar results from that, because it's understanding the mechanics of what's going on, not just in your body, but also that kind of human mindset aspect that has to come into any long-term nutrition and lifestyle plan as well. Hopefully that was interesting. Hopefully that answered the question, does one meal throw you off? The answer is still, it depends. As you can see, it does depend on what that meal is, how often you're doing it, and what your goal is. But now you've got an understanding of why it depends. So hopefully helpful. Comment blueprint below, and let's make some changes if this is you and you're ready to go. Have a good one, guys.